The Unity Dawn was a massive ship, a symbol of peace between various species traveling through the galaxy on a mission of diplomacy. It had sleek silver walls, intricate alien patterns glowing softly across its halls, and a quiet hum that seemed to echo every time someone moved. On one particular evening, the corridors were quiet, with only the soft sound of boots echoing through the halls. Evan Holt, a young human engineer, found himself in his tiny room, finishing the last bit of his repairs on the ship's translation systems. It was late, and the ship was still in orbit around a neutral space station. Evan had finished his work hours ago but stayed behind, making sure every system was working smoothly. He enjoyed the quiet and the solitude, far away from the noise of the diplomats and their endless discussions about treaties and peace talks. His small room was filled with tools, wires, and the soft glow of the console in front of him. Evan liked it that way. Orderly, controlled. Just as he was about to finish cleaning up, there was a sudden, sharp noise from the hallway. The door to his room slid open. He looked up in surprise. Someone had entered, but it wasn't the person he expected. Tall figure stood in the doorway, a woman but not human. Her skin was a soft lilac hue glowing faintly in the dim light. Her eyes were large and almond-shaped, a deep violet color that shimmered as though reflecting the stars outside. She wore a long, flowing cloak, the hem brushing against the ground as she stepped inside. Evan's mouth went dry, but he quickly stood up from his seat. The alien woman blinked, her expression one of confusion and mild panic. I think this is not my room," she said in a soft, melodic voice that seemed almost out of place in the quiet ship. Evan froze, unsure of how to respond. His first instinct was to help, but he had no idea who she was or why she was here. He glanced at the door's control panel. It had closed automatically after she entered, and it didn't look like it would open without a command. "No, it's not," Evan said, his voice calmer than he felt. "But I can help you. You seem lost." The woman nodded slowly, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for something familiar. She took a few tentative steps inside, still unsure. I am the princess," she began, pausing as if unsure of how much she should share. "I am Princess Thalira Velzen of the Oranthian people. I was looking for my chambers." Her voice trailed off as she seemed to shrink in on herself, clearly embarrassed. Evan blinked, processing her words. Princess? A royal? He couldn't. Imagine how she ended up here, lost in the labyrinth of the Unity Dawn. A mix of curiosity and concern washed over him. It wasn't every day that a royal alien princess showed up at your doorstep by mistake. "Well, Princess Thalira, it looks like you've come to the wrong room," Evan said gently. "But don't worry, I can help you find your way. Let me see if I can get the door open." He walked over to the door's control panel and tried to unlock it, but it wouldn't budge. The system was glitching. Of course, it was the one system that had failed just that day. It was frustrating, but Evan kept his calm. "It looks like the door's stuck. I'll have to fix it manually." Thalira looked at him with wide eyes, still standing in the middle of the room, unsure whether she should stay or leave. The air between them was filled with an awkward silence. It was the kind of silence that made Evan feel uncomfortable, but at the same time, it was a bit peaceful. He noticed that she wasn't as tense as she had been when she first entered, though she still seemed uncertain. After a moment, she stepped closer, her eyes focused on the tools scattered across Evan's desk. "You are not like the others," she said quietly. "Most of the humans I've met have been loud. They speak quickly, act quickly, move quickly." She glanced at Evan. "But you seem different. Calm." Evan chuckled softly, surprised by her observation. "I guess I just prefer to work quietly. No need for all the noise." Thalira tilted her head as if considering his words carefully. "It is strange. I thought humans would be more chaotic." Evan smiled and shrugged. "Well, we can be, but we're also adaptable. Sometimes we prefer things quiet." Thalira's eyes softened as she looked at him. "I think I would like to understand more about you. About humans. Evan blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected that. I'd be happy to explain anything I can. But, let's get you back to your room first. As he fiddled with the control panel, he noticed how Thalira stood there still and observant, watching him with an intensity that he hadn't expected. Despite her royal status, there was something almost shy about her, a quiet grace that caught him off guard. Finally, the door opened with a soft whoosh, but instead of leaving, Thalira remained standing in the doorway, her gaze fixed on him. "Thank you," she said quietly. Evan smiled and nodded. "No problem. Glad I could help." But instead of leaving, she stood there for a moment, hesitating. If you don't mind, I think I will stay here for a little while. I find it calming, being around you." Evan was caught off guard again. This was unexpected. But as he looked at her standing in his doorway, he could tell she was serious. "Sure," he said with a shrug, feeling more at ease than he had in a long while. "You're welcome to stay." And just like that, Princess Thalira of Oranthia entered his room by mistake, but it seemed as though she wasn't quite ready to leave. In the days that followed, Princess Thalira Velzen returned to Evan's room again and again. At first it seemed like a simple mistake. She had wandered into the wrong room once. What were the chances of her doing it again? But each day she would show up with the same quiet, hesitant look in her eyes, as if she had nowhere else to go. Evan didn't mind. In fact, he found her company strangely calming. Despite her royal status and the strange shimmering patterns on her skin, Thalira had an easy way about her that made him feel at ease. She wasn't like the diplomats he'd encountered, always rushing through conversations or trying to impress others with their status. No, Thalira was different. She was quiet, thoughtful, and more than anything, curious. On their third meeting, Thalira didn't even knock. She simply entered, her lavender eyes glancing over the room before she spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, voice soft. "I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I wanted to see you again." Evan smiled. "No need to apologize. You're welcome to stay. Honestly, it's nice having someone to talk to. I don't see many people around here who enjoy the quiet." Thalira nodded, taking a seat at the small table near the window. She looked out at the endless stars, her face filled with thought. "The stars, they remind me of home, of the endless sky on Oranthia, the world where I was born." Evan took a seat across from her, intrigued. "Tell me more about Oranthia. What's it like?" Thalira paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "Oranthia is beautiful," she said, her voice soft with fondness. "The sky is always filled with colors, different shades of blue, violet, and gold. There are forests of tall trees with glowing leaves, and oceans that shimmer like liquid crystal. But," she faltered, her eyes looking distant, as though she was recalling something painful. "But not everyone there is kind. We live in a world of tradition, and sometimes traditions trap us." Evan leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Thalira's gaze lowered. "On Oranthia, we live by strict rules. The royal family, especially, has a duty to maintain certain alliances through marriage. When I was young, I was promised to a noble from another star system. It was an arrangement made long before I was born, a political tool to secure peace. But I've never been able to accept it." Evan nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. "You didn't choose it, did you?" "No," she replied quietly. "I didn't. I don't want to be used as a symbol of peace. I want to be seen for who I am, not just as a political pawn." Evan could sense her struggle, the weight of her words. "That must be hard," he said gently. She smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his for the first time since she began speaking. "It is. But meeting you, it has made me think. Maybe there's more to life than following the rules." Evan felt a strange warmth spread through him. He didn't fully understand what it meant for someone like Thalira to question everything. Her world had taught her, but he could tell that it was a big step. He had always admired people who were willing to challenge tradition, to step outside the boundaries set for them. It was a quality he had hoped to see more of in the universe. "So, what are you going to do?" Evan asked, his voice quiet, his eyes sincere. Thalira looked out at the stars again as though seeking the answers from the endless expanse. "I don't know," she said softly, "but I want to find out. Maybe I need to see what it's like to make my own choices, even if they're scary." Evan sat back in his chair, giving her space. He understood the weight of what she was saying. He didn't have all the answers, but there was something about Thalira that made him want to help her find them. A soft beeping sound broke the silence. Evan glanced at his console. "Looks like the ship's systems are back online," he said with a slight grin. "I guess that means I've done my job for today." Thalira looked over at him, and for the first time, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. "You've done more than that," she said softly. Evan blinked, not fully understanding her words. "What do you mean?" "You've helped me," Thalira explained. "Without even trying, without even knowing, you've given me a place to think, to breathe. I've never been allowed to just exist without a purpose. But here, with you, I can." Evan's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to say. Was he really that important to her? To someone so far from his world, so different from him? Yet there was a connection, something neither of them could deny. "Well, I'm glad I could help," Evan said, his voice a little quieter than before. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." Thalira shook her head. "Not everyone would. You're different, I can see it." Evan felt a warmth spread through him again, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. He didn't know where this was going, but for the first time since meeting her, he felt as if maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something much bigger than either of them had expected. As the days passed, the quiet routine between Evan Holt and Princess Thalira Velzen continued. What had begun as an accidental meeting soon turned into something neither of them had expected. They spent their time together, talking, sharing stories, and learning about each other's worlds. Thalira, the royal princess of Oranthia, had never experienced anything like this before. She was used to the formalities of her royal life, the expectations that came with her title, and the constant pressure of being a symbol of peace for her people. But here, with Evan, she was just herself, a person. And for the first time in her life, she felt free. Evan, on the other hand, found something in her that he had never seen before in the bustling world he'd known. Thalira was unlike anyone he had ever met, graceful, intelligent, and yet so full of questions about the world. He had always felt like a small part of something larger, a cog in a machine that helped the ship run smoothly. But with Thalira, he felt like he was truly seen for who he was, not just his role as an engineer. One evening, after a long day of meetings and discussions, Thalira appeared at Evan's door again. She didn't knock this time, as if she had decided she was welcome, here as much as he was. "I've been thinking," Thalira said softly, stepping into the room, "about everything you've told me, about humans and your world. It's so different from Oranthia." Evan turned to her, setting down his tools. "What's different?" he asked, genuinely curious. "There's so much freedom on Earth, isn't there?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "I watch you, how you move, how you make choices for yourself. I've never seen anyone just be themselves like you do. We're all expected to follow orders, to obey rules." Evan smiled, understanding the weight behind her words. "I guess that's true, but freedom doesn't always mean it's easy, you know? People still have responsibilities, they still have to figure out who they are, even without rules." Thalira paused, looking at him with wide eyes. "What do you mean?" Evan leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment. "I mean that freedom is great, but it also comes with uncertainty. When you have no one telling you what to do, you have to decide for yourself. It's not always easy to know what the right thing is." Thalira nodded slowly, processing his words. "I never thought about it that way," she said quietly. "On Oranthia, we never had to worry about making choices. They were made for us. My future, my place in the world, It was all decided before I was born. And now, for the first time in my life, I'm trying to figure out who I really am. Evan felt a sense of understanding settle between them. I think that's the hardest part of being human, he said gently. Knowing that there's no one answer. We make mistakes, we learn, and we keep going. But the freedom to choose, well, that's what makes it all worth it. Thalira smiled, though her eyes were filled, with a mix of confusion and hope. I want to understand it, she said. I want to know what it feels like to make my own choices, not for someone else, but for myself. Evan stood up from his chair, walking over to where she was standing near the window. He could see the stars in her eyes, the way she was trying to make sense of the world outside the royal walls she had been confined to. You're doing it already, Evan said softly. Every time you come here, every time you choose to spend time with me, you're making a choice. And that's the first step. Thalira looked at him, a flicker of realization crossing her face. I hadn't thought of it like that. I thought I had to wait for permission for someone to tell me what to do, but maybe I don't have to wait anymore. No, Evan said, his voice gentle but firm. You don't. They stood in silence, for a moment, watching the stars outside the window. The quiet between them was comfortable, not awkward like it had been at first. They didn't need words to understand each other anymore. The door to Evan's room beeped softly, signaling a message. Evan glanced over at the console but didn't make a move to check it. He knew what was more important right now. Thalira seemed to sense his thoughts. Are you sure you don't have to go? She asked. I don't want to keep you from your work. Evan shook his head. No work can't wait, right? Not today. Besides, I think we both deserve a break. Thalira's eyes brightened with a soft laugh. I don't think I've ever had a real break before, she said. I've spent my whole life being told what to do, how to act. But here, with you, it's different. I can just breathe. Evan smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest at her words. I'm glad you feel that way. You deserve to breathe. For the rest of the evening, they sat together by the window, talking more about Earth and Oranthia, about freedom and responsibility, about what it meant to live without the weight of other people's expectations. Thalira spoke of her hopes for the future, and Evan shared his simple dreams, like one day seeing the stars up close. It was a night full of quiet laughter and stories. As the evening turned into night, and the stars grew brighter in the sky, Thalira felt something stir within her, a sense of peace she had never known. She was no longer the princess bound by duty. She was Thalira, the woman who had made a choice to change her path, to find her own way. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize that the first step toward finding herself was in this very room, with a human who had shown her what it meant to breathe freely. The Unity Dawn was a massive ship, a vessel meant to carry hope and peace across the stars. Its halls were filled with people from many different planets, each with their own customs, traditions, and expectations. But it wasn't just the diplomats who made the ship's atmosphere tense. There were always eyes watching, always whispers of politics, power, and tradition. Evan was used to the pressure. He was just an engineer, after all, there to fix things and keep the ship running smoothly. But lately he had felt a different kind of tension, one that had nothing to do with his work and everything to do with Thalira. She had become a constant presence in his life. What had started as a chance encounter had blossomed into a connection neither of them had expected. Thalira had returned to his room day after day, each visit more meaningful than the last. They spent hours talking, sharing their worlds with each other. She, the royal princess of Oranthia, and he, the simple human engineer, two very different people, yet bound by the quiet understanding they shared. But not everyone was pleased with their growing bond. Evan had first noticed the subtle changes in Thalira's behavior a few days ago. She had become quieter, more distant, as if something weighed heavily on her mind. At first he thought it was just the stress of the diplomatic meetings. But when she didn't show up at their usual meeting time, His worry grew. He tried to focus on his work, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with the other aliens on the ship. Thalira had always been careful to avoid the subject of politics, but Evan knew that her status as a princess came with its own set of expectations. Expectations that he couldn't possibly understand. Finally, a day after Thalira had missed their meeting, Evan received a message, one that wasn't a simple repair request or technical issue. The message was from the Unity Dawn security team. He read it carefully. The message was brief but unsettling. Princess Thalira has been placed in isolation as per protocol. She is not to make contact with non-diplomatic personnel until further notice. Evan's heart sank. The words hit him harder than he expected. He knew that Thalira's people had strict traditions, but this felt like more than just tradition. It felt like an order that had come from someone higher up the chain of command, someone who didn't see Thalira for who she was, but only as a piece in a political game. Without wasting any more time, Evan went to the ship's central hub where the security systems were managed. His mind raced, thinking of ways to get to Thalira to speak with her. He couldn't let her be isolated like this, not after everything they had shared. As he reached the security checkpoint, a guard stepped forward. "Engineer Holt," the guard said, his tone neutral. "You're not permitted beyond this point." Evan glanced at the guard, his thoughts running faster than he could speak. "I need to see Princess Thalira," he said, his voice firm. "There's been some kind of mistake. She's not supposed to be isolated." The guard shook his head, unblinking. "You're not on the list of approved visitors." Evan's frustration flared. He knew he couldn't just demand entry. He didn't have the authority. But Thalira, she was more than just a princess. She was a person, and he couldn't let her be treated like this. "I understand," Evan said, his voice softening. "But if you see her, tell her I'm here. Tell her I'll wait. I'm not leaving until I know she's okay." The guard hesitated, then nodded. It was a small gesture, but Evan took it as a sign that he wasn't entirely out of options. Hours passed. Evan remained in the hall outside the security checkpoint, pacing, waiting. His mind kept returning to the same thought. What was happening to Thalira? Why had they put her in isolation? Was she being punished for something? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the guard returned. "You can see her now," he said, his voice still neutral. "But you have 10 minutes. Evan's heart raced. He had to act quickly. He followed the guard through the long, sterile corridors of the ship, finally arriving at a small, private chamber. As the guard opened the door, Evan's breath caught in his chest. There, sitting quietly by a window, was Thalira. She looked so different now. Her posture was tense, and her face, usually so serene, was clouded with worry. She looked up as he entered, her eyes flickering with surprise and something else. Relief, maybe. "Evan," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Evan stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thalira, what's going on? Why are you in here? What happened?" Thalira sighed, looking down at her hands. "It's complicated," she said. "I've been placed in isolation by my people. They think I'm getting too close to you, too involved with humans." Evan frowned, stepping closer. "But we haven't done anything wrong. You shouldn't be isolated like this." Thalira shook her head, her expression pained. "It's not about what we've done. It's about what I represent. The moment I began to question the traditions of my people, I became a threat. To them, a princess can't have her own life, her own choices. I'm a symbol, and symbols don't get to make decisions for themselves." Evan stood there for a moment, taking in her words. It was clear now. Thalira wasn't just a princess. She was a prisoner in her own life, bound by rules that had nothing to do with her heart. "I'm sorry," Evan said, his voice thick with emotion. "This isn't right. I won't let them keep you in here." Thalira looked up at him, her eyes full of gratitude. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered. I feel so lost. Evan placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his heart aching. You don't have to figure it all out alone. I'm here and I'll help you no matter what. Thalira's eyes shone with something that wasn't just sadness, it was hope. Thank you, she said, her voice full of sincerity. Thank you for seeing me for who I really am. Evan smiled softly, feeling a connection with her that went deeper than anything he had ever known. He didn't have all the answers, but for now, being with her was enough. They would face whatever came next, together. Evan sat in his room long after his brief meeting with Princess Thalira had ended. The words they had shared, the weight of her confession echoed in his mind. He had never imagined that something as simple as a friendship could be so complicated, so filled with politics and power. Thalira was trapped in a world that didn't allow her to make choices for herself. A world where she was seen as a symbol, not as a person. And yet, despite it all, she had made a choice. She had chosen to be with him, to seek comfort in his company, despite the dangers it might bring. Evan couldn't help but feel both honored and heartbroken. Thalira had shown him more of her true self than anyone had probably seen in years, and yet she was still bound by forces much stronger than either of them could imagine. The door to his room beeped, pulling Evan from his thoughts. He glanced up as it slid open, and there stood Thalira, her face no longer clouded with worry but filled with a sense of determination that caught him off guard. Thalira? Evan stood, his heart beating faster at the sight of her. What are you doing here? I thought. Thalira raised a hand, cutting him off. I made a decision, she said, her voice steady. I don't want to live my life trapped by rules and expectations anymore. I don't want to be a symbol, a tool, used to settle political debts. I want to make my own choices. And for the first time in my life, I'm choosing to stay here. With you. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He had hoped for this moment, but hearing her say the words aloud was something else entirely. He stepped forward, his mind racing. Are you sure? Thalira, this isn't going to be easy. Your people, your family, they won't let you just walk away. Thalira nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. I know, but I've spent my whole life living for them, for their expectations, and I'm tired of it. I can't keep hiding who I am just to please them. If they want to isolate me, they will, but I can't go back to that life. Evan could see the fear in her eyes, the weight of the decision she had made. It was a brave choice, and he could only imagine how much courage it took for her to come to this point. But as he looked at her standing in front of him with such strength and determination, he knew that this was the right decision for her. You don't have to do this alone, Evan said softly. I'll help you, Thalira. Whatever it takes, I'll stand by you. Thalira's lips curled into a faint smile, and for a moment, she looked more like the girl she had once been. Before the crown, before the weight of responsibility had crushed her dreams. Thank you, she whispered. I've never had anyone offer to help me like this. You're the first person who's ever seen me for who I really am. Not as a princess, but as a person. Evan smiled back, his heart swelling with emotion. You're more than just a princess, Thalira. You're you, and that's all that matters. The room was quiet for a moment as they simply looked at each other, both understanding the gravity of the moment. Thalira had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. It was a path full of uncertainty, but it was hers to walk, and Evan would walk beside her every step of the way. But as the silence stretched on, Evan couldn't help but wonder what would come next. Thalira had made a bold choice, but that didn't mean it would be easy. Her people would be furious and the pressure would only increase. He had no idea what kind of consequences they would face, but he knew one thing for sure. Thalira wasn't alone anymore. I'll stay, Thalira said again, this time with more confidence. I'll stay here with you, and together we'll figure out what happens next. Evan's heart pounded as he nodded. We will. We'll face it together. Just then, the door slid open again, and this time, it wasn't just the two of them. standing there. A figure appeared in the doorway, one of the ship's higher-ranking officials, a member of the delegation from Oranthia. His uniform was adorned with markings of authority, and the stern expression on his face made it clear that he wasn't here for a friendly visit. "Princess Thalera," the man said, his voice cold, "you are requested to return to your quarters. The council has issued new orders. You are to remain in isolation for the remainder of your stay." Evan tensed, his protective instincts kicking in. "You can't just—" Thalera held up a hand, silencing him before he could speak. She stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she looked the man in the eye. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not going back. I've made my decision. I'm no longer following the council's orders. I will live my life the way I choose, not as a pawn in their game." The official's eyes widened in shock. "You cannot defy the council, Princess. You don't understand the consequences of your actions." "I understand enough," Thalera replied, her voice calm but resolute. "The only consequence I fear is continuing to live a life that isn't my own. I won't be controlled anymore." The official stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as if struggling to find the words. Finally, he simply turned and walked away, leaving Thalera and Evan standing there, the weight of her choice hanging in the air. Evan looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. She had done it. She had taken control of her life. "You're amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thalera smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "No," she replied quietly. "I'm just starting to be who I truly am." And for the first time, Thalera felt like she was finally free. The days that followed were a mix of quiet determination and mounting pressure. Thalera had made her choice. She would no longer be bound by the expectations of her people. She would no longer live in a cage of tradition and politics. But even as she stood firm in her decision, she couldn't shake the feeling that the weight of her choices was beginning to press down on her more than she had expected. Evan had been her support throughout it all. He didn't try to fix things, didn't try to offer easy solutions. He simply listened, shared his thoughts, and made sure she knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. But the pressure was building, and it wasn't long before the council from Oranthia sent a message, one that made the situation even more complicated. One morning, as the light of distant stars filtered through the window of Evan's room, the door beeped. It was a soft sound, but it sent a ripple of anxiety through the room. Thalera's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the door's control panel, and when it opened, the face that appeared in the doorway wasn't one she had expected. It was Lord Veller, a high-ranking official from Oranthia. He was a tall, imposing figure, his uniform decorated with symbols of authority. His eyes were cold, sharp, and calculating. "Princess Thalera," he said, his voice thick with formality. "You are requested to attend a meeting with the council immediately. Your actions have caused concern and you must answer for them." Evan's heart sank, but he remained calm. He stepped forward, standing beside Thalera, offering her a silent show of support. "I've made my decision," Thalera said, her voice steady. "I'm no longer bound by your orders. I will not be part of a political game." Lord Veller's expression hardened. "You do not understand the consequences of your actions. The council has decided that you will be returned to Oranthia for your own safety. You are a symbol of peace, and that symbol cannot be compromised." Evan could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. He could see the fear in Thalera's eyes, but he also saw something else, a spark of defiance that had not been there before. "No," Thalera said, her voice stronger this time. "I refuse to go back. I will not be treated like a pawn in your games. You can't make me return to a life where I'm nothing more than a tool." Lord Veller's eyes flickered with something close to anger. "You are not in a position to—" "Refuse, Princess. Your people will not allow it." But Thalera didn't back down. She stood tall, looking Lord Veller in the eye. "Then let them try. I won't go back to a life that's not mine." For a moment there was silence. The air felt charged, like something was about to break. Lord Veller studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter. "You are making a mistake, Princess. Your actions will have consequences." Thalira stood her ground. "I've already made my choice, and I won't apologize for it." Lord Veller glanced at Evan, who stood silently by Thalira's side. He seemed to weigh his options, and for a moment it felt like he was considering something, but then with a curt nod he stepped back. "Very well," he said, his voice cold. "You will face the consequences of your decision. But know this, Princess, your life as you knew it is over. You are no longer the symbol of peace that your people need. You have chosen a path of defiance, and the Council will not forget it." With that, he turned and left, leaving Thalira and Evan alone once more. For a long moment Thalira didn't move. She stood there, her eyes fixed on the door that had just closed behind Lord Veller. The weight of his words hung in the air, but she didn't let them crush her. She had made her choice, and no matter the cost, she was not going back. Evan stepped closer to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "You chose to be yourself, and that's all that matters." Thalira looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I don't know what comes next. I don't know what will happen to me now, but I can't live my life for other people anymore. I have to live for myself." Evan nodded, his voice filled with certainty. "And I'll be here with you. You don't have to face this alone." For the first time in days, Thalira allowed herself to smile, though it was small and hesitant. "Thank you, Evan. I don't know what I would do without you." "You'll never have to find out," Evan replied, his voice filled with warmth. As the day wore on, the ship's hum became a comforting background to their quiet moments. The uncertainty of the future still lingered, but in that moment, it didn't seem as overwhelming. Thalira had made her choice, and Evan was right there beside her, ready to face whatever came next. The universe was vast and full of challenges, but for the first time, Thalira felt like she was in control of her own fate. The road ahead was unclear, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't walking it alone. The days after Lord Veller's visit were tense. Thalira and Evan knew that things had changed, forever. Thalira's decision to defy the Council had set events in motion that neither of them could fully predict. But despite the uncertainty of the future, one thing was clear: Thalira wasn't going back to her old life, and neither was Evan. After the confrontation with Lord Veller, the Council made it clear they weren't happy with Thalira's choice. Their communications grew colder, their demands more urgent. But Thalira refused to be intimidated. She refused to shrink back into the shadows of her royal duties. She was finally living for herself. For the first time, Thalira felt free. Evan remained by her side, offering support and quiet strength. Every step they took, every decision they made, was a shared one. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to face it together. One evening, as the stars outside the ship shimmered brightly in the vastness of space, Thalira found herself standing by the window, her arms folded across her chest. She looked out at the endless expanse of stars, her mind far away. Evan entered the room quietly, as if sensing her need for space. He watched her for a moment, before speaking softly. "What's on your mind?" Thalira sighed, her gaze never leaving the stars. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said, her voice distant. "I don't know if I'm ready for what the Council might do. I don't know if I'm ready for the consequences." Evan stepped closer, standing beside her. "You don't have to be ready for everything. You don't have to know every answer right now. You've already made the hardest choice." Thalira turned to look at him, her eyes soft. "I know, but it doesn't make the road ahead any easier. I've never been in a position where I wasn't following orders. Everything I've known has been dictated to me, until now." Evan smiled gently. "That's why you're so brave. You've stepped out of your world, your duties, and chosen your own path. That takes courage. You're doing something no one in your position has ever done." Thalira's lips curled into a small smile, but it was filled with doubt. I don't know if it's courage. Sometimes it feels like I'm just running away from the life I was meant to have. Evan shook his head. You're not running away. You're choosing a new life, a life that's yours. And that's something not everyone gets to do. The silence between them felt comforting, like a shared understanding. Thalira felt the weight of his words settle in her heart. She wasn't running away. She was moving towards something, a future of her own making. As the days turned into weeks, Thalira and Evan found themselves adjusting to a new kind of life. Thalira was still in the midst of the diplomatic mission, but now her role was changing. She was no longer a princess under the control of her people. She was a woman with choices, with the power to shape her own future. The council continued to send messages, urging her to return to Auranthia. They tried to remind her of her responsibilities, of the expectations that came with her royal title. But Thalira ignored them. She had made her decision, and she would not let anyone take that from her. Evan worked alongside her, helping her navigate the complicated political landscape of the Unity Dawn. Though they didn't have all the answers, they did have each other, and in that, Thalira found a kind of peace she had never known before. One afternoon, as they sat together in a quiet corner of the ship's observation deck, Thalira looked over at Evan, her eyes filled with gratitude. I never thought it would be like this, she said softly. I never thought I could have a life of my own. I always thought I was meant to follow the path others had laid out for me. Evan smiled, his gaze steady. You've always had that choice. You just had to find it. Thalira reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. She had found someone who saw her for who she truly was, not just as a princess, not as a symbol, but as a person with dreams, hopes, and the right to choose her own path. I'm glad I found you, she said quietly. I'm glad you're here with me. Evan squeezed her hand, his voice filled with sincerity. I wouldn't be anywhere else. For the first time, Thalira felt a deep sense of contentment. She had made the right choice. It hadn't been easy, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But with Evan by her side, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. And though the council's pressure was constant, Thalira didn't feel afraid anymore. She had her own life to live, and no one could take that from her. The stars outside the window twinkled brightly, their light reflecting in her eyes. She was no longer bound by the past. She was free to build her future, a future that was hers alone.